Hi there, and welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, I am going to discuss the differences between Lightroom Profiles and Lightroom Presets. We're also going to talk about how these powerful editing tools can work together to change the look and feel of your photos. So let's get started by talking about profiles. What is a Lightroom profile? Basically, a profile is a translation of the data contained in the raw image when you upload that image. I like to think of profiles like complex formulas, and in this case, they involve things like RGB curves, gradient mapping, and all kinds of other kind of behind the scenes adjustments to create different kinds of overall looks in a photo. You can find the Lightroom profiles in the Develop module, which is where we are, and they are in the Basic panel. You can see all of the different types of profiles that are available in Lightroom by opening up the profile browser, which is this little set of 4 rectangles here. If I click on that, it will expand and show you the profile browser. This slider will adjust the intensity of a profile. We'll come back to that, and we'll also come back to these filters in a moment. First of all, I would like to draw your attention to the different types of profiles that are available. There are some basic Adobe RAW, and these are very basic profiles, just ways of interpreting the data that comes into, or that is brought in from your photo image. And then there are camera matching, depending on the type of camera you have. I shoot with Canon. These are different types of profiles that are available on my Canon, so it extracts that information as well. There are also 4 different types of artistic profiles, and these are the ones that we'll spend the most time on in this video. As we take a look at some of these individual profiles, notice the different types of tones in the light areas and the shadowy areas. Notice also the level of contrast between the light and dark. Some are more saturated, some are less saturated. We won't go through all of them, but I would like to show you just the variety of looks that you can achieve with just using the Lightroom profiles. So in this artistic set, notice, for example, this artistic 01 profile. Also, I just would like to point out, if I hover over the thumbnail in the profile browser, it will give me a preview of that in the main image area. So notice in this first artistic profile how cool the tones are in the background, and also notice kind of a warm reddish tone in the wood of this little box. So that's a really interesting type of profile and an interesting look. And in contrast, if you take a look at this artistic 07, that now is the other direction. This profile, notice how much warmer the lighter areas in the photo are, and also it's quite a bit desaturated, just not a lot of color, not a lot of texture. The wood tones are very muted, so that's another really interesting look that you can get with a profile. Now if we come to these black and white profiles, you'll notice a lot of these just have varying levels of contrast and light and dark, contrast in the light and dark areas. So for instance, this first black and white, I would say this is not a high contrast image. It's actually quite light. But if we scroll down a bit to this black and white 12, notice now this is actually quite contrasty. The darker, really dark darks and pretty light lights. I can just use this little arrow to collapse that set, just to make it easier to scroll through. I really enjoy using these modern profiles in my own editing. I think they have a great kind of a film-like look. They don't offer quite the variety in tones, but I like that. I like kind of a more subtle editing to my photos. But there are some really interesting profiles in this modern set. Notice this one is quite desaturated and not a lot of contrast at all, whereas this one I would say is a little bit more contrasty and a little more saturated. I also really like the vintage profiles. This one is got a really soft look, a little bit desaturated, and this vintage 5 is a little bit darker, a little bit less contrast. But then if you look at this vintage 8, it's got a really interesting tone, cool tones in the background, kind of a soft finish. This also gives me kind of a vintage film vibe. So just lots of different looks to choose from. With so many different types of profiles, it can be hard sometimes to decide which one you want to use. And to me, it really depends on the story that I'm trying to tell in my photo. And in this case, with this subject, which is a collection of vintage bottles and a little wooden box and just some of my other vintage treasures, I would probably choose something in one of these in this vintage set, just because I just like the overall feel of it, kind of that old film style. So yeah, that's a good way to go about deciding what profile to use. Really quickly, I want to bring your attention back up to this top part of the profile browser. In this row, you can see here, this is a way to filter some of the different profiles. So if you only wanted to look at black and white or color profiles, you could select one of these options to only see the black and white or only see the color. I'll just leave it on off right now. You can also, if there are certain profiles that you find yourself using again and again, you can save them as favorites. There's a little star in the upper right corner. You can click on this star to add it to your favorite list. This vintage 06 is definitely one of my favorites. I come back to it quite a lot. So I've got that in my favorites group. You can see all of the ones that I tend to go for the most. And then also at the top, there's a slider here. And with this slider, you can adjust the overall strength or intensity of the profile. So for instance, with this vintage 6 profile, if I move the slider over to the right, you can see how it is strengthening that look. And then if I bring my slider back to the left, you see more of the original photo. So I typically bring my slider a little, somewhere between 50 and 100, just to get the major feel of the profile, and then go back and add some of my own adjustment sliders after the fact. You can also change how you view the different profiles in the profile browser. If you come over to this grid, this little set of double arrows, you can look at them with large thumbnails, so you get a little bit bigger preview of that profile, how that profile would look. You can also just look at it in a list form like this with no preview. I typically use this grid. That way I get a nice overview of the different options that are available for me to use in my photo. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about presets now. Presets are different from profiles in that they are basically a set of instructions, a recipe, kind of a shortcut, if you will, a one-click shortcut for a collection of adjustments that you make in the develop module in the different panels. So it's just the set of instructions of all of the different sliders that you might change, all of the different types of tweaks that you can make in these panels. Now, presets are something that you can buy from different types of third parties. I've bought several over the years. This is a set of presets that I bought from Pretty Presets. They're one that offer quite a bit. Kim Klassen also offers presets. So they are, like I said, a set of instructions. Now, you can preview them similarly like we did in profile. So if you hover over a preset, you can see the effect that it's going to have on your photo. So in this case, these third-party presets Say that 10 times fast. You can see the different ways that they affect the different tonal changes. It's very similar to a profile. But notice now, if I go ahead and click on this preset, it's called Gold Coast. If I click on that preset now, notice what's happened in my basic panel. Notice that it has changed the slider to -20. It's adjusted these sliders here. It's also changed the vibrance and saturation. There's some color grading going on. It's changed made changes to these sliders in the HSL or color panel. So this is what I mean by the difference between profiles and presets. Now we're talking about changes in these different panels, and so the one click is a shortcut to all of these changes. So in addition to these third-party presets that you can purchase, Lightroom also now offers its own set of presets, and so there are a lot of different styles here. I'm just going to click on Reset to get back to my original photo so you can see some of these new presets that are available with Lightroom. There are some portrait options. This is a retro set. Lots of interesting changes in the tones and contrast and saturation. Once again, I really like this vintage set. I think they have some really cool looks here. Just different sort of vintage camera or vintage film vibes. I really like a lot of these. There's also some food related. These are different, a little more saturated for those that are maybe food photographers, because you want food to look really pretty and bright and saturated. So just depending on the subject matter of your photo, you might find that one of these has the right feel and the right vibe that you would like to use for your photo. I also really like this lifestyle set. Once again, some really cool, artistic, interesting ways to change the look and feel of your photo. Have a look at this one now, this Lifestyle 06. It's decreased the whites and the blacks. It's added quite a lot of texture and clarity. It's a little bit desaturated, but not a whole lot. It's changed the tone curve a little bit. There's a little bit of a matte finish here. Lots of changes in the color panel. So you can see what I mean. These are all changes to the panels in the develop modules versus something that is behind the scenes. Okay, so we've talked about profiles and we've talked about presets. The nice thing is that you can use profiles and presets together. So that's what I've done in this image of mine. Let me come up here to my basic panel. When I use presets and profiles together, I always start with the profile first. It's always the first, the overall look and feel of a photo. And so you can see for this image, I have used the modern 03 profile, and I've got it set at about 68 on the intensity slider. I've made a few tweaks to the exposure and boosted the contrast a little bit. I've also added quite a bit of texture and clarity to this. I kind of like the little bit of a gritty feel. I have also desaturated it a little bit, but keeping some of the overall vibrance of the image. I've also changed the tone curve to have that matte or film style feeling. The tone curve, what am I trying to say? The matte finish in my photo. I like that look. I've added some details here in the sharpening panel. I've added a bit of sharpening and some noise reduction. I've also added a bit of a vignette just to kind of draw the eye into, or bring the attention into the center of the photo. So I think that's a really great way to show how profiles and presets can work together, and I really enjoy using them both. if you come up with a recipe yourself that you really like, so for instance, if I want to save not only the profile that I've chosen, but these other adjustments that I've made, I can create my own presets, and I do that often. And you can do that by clicking this little plus sign next to the preset, and I can say preset. So I typically just group mine by the year just because I play around with it a lot. So I'll put this in my 2022 presets, and I'll probably just call this something I've worked on in February. And then I typically like to include the profile that I used. It just gives me a little bit of an idea of where I started with my preset. I will go ahead and check none to start with. I'm going to choose the treatment and profile because that is where the profile is located. This is the setting for that. I'm also going to check contrast, and I'm going to check texture, clarity, the dehaze, vibrance, and saturation. Exposure, highlight, shadows, whites, and blacks, those can vary from photo to photo depending on how I took it or how I exposed it in camera. So those are something that I probably would change on an individual basis. So I'm not going to save that as a preset. I'm going to change my tone curve, or select the tone curve and the HSL color panel, my color grading, my sharpening, my lens correction. I haven't applied any transformation, but that would probably be something that I would do on an individual basis. I'm also going to go ahead and select the post-crop vignette, and I think that's everything I need to save this preset for myself. So I can just go ahead and say create, and now I can come back to this preset whenever I want, and it will save for me all of the different settings and adjustments that I have made in these adjustment panels. So I hope that helps you understand a little bit of the difference between profiles and presets and how they can work together. Like I said, it's something I really enjoy experimenting with and coming up with my own unique take on the look and feel of my photos. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and please let me know if you have any questions.